few minutes ago, they said they weren't going to introduce me. That if I wanted to, I'd give you some of my credentials. I forgot and left them home, so I can't give them to you. Now, the only credentials I can give to you, I'm a child of God, and I have children. I've been a father for 52 years, 52 and a half years. We've been married for 55 years, and we've made a lot of mistakes. Those are my credentials. I'm here this week, been invited to share some family matters. We are a family of God, but we have individual families that make up that family. As individual families, we struggle. Sometimes we feel like we're beating our heads against the wall, trying to find answers. We share things together to try to help each other, to cope with situations and difficulties we run into in life. And we still come up empty many times. We come up with sometimes more questions than we have answers. But we all have one thing in common, and that is we have a God who is our Father, who is patient with us as we try to figure it out, as we try to do it right. I've never known anybody that did it 100% right. I've known some better parents than others, but I've never known a perfect one other than my Father in heaven. And that's what we want to try to discuss this week, of things that He tells us, how to be better husbands and wives, how to be better children, how to be better parents, how to be better friends, how to be better people. And so hopefully we can do that this week. I will not provide every answer, may not provide any for you, but hopefully we can share some. I know Judy and I were talking the other day about how that our children were little, where I was preaching at the time, we had a young adults class, and we met once a month, and all of us had small children, and we'd share things together, how we could help each other, and what worked for us and what didn't work for us. That helped a lot, and that's what we want to do this week. As we do that this morning, I want us to go to Ephesians chapter 6, not Ephesians 5, this morning anyway. When we got married, I'll tell you a little inside story here. The preacher at our wedding read Ephesians 5. That night, our first night of being married, for our devotional, I read Ephesians 5. And for several nights after that, for several weeks, several months after that, I read Ephesians 5 because I wanted Judy to know her place. That I was the head of the family, I was the head of the house. But then I read Ephesians 5. And I stopped reading Ephesians 5 to Judy all the time. Because Ephesians 5 speaks more to the husband than it does to the wife. And lays a heavy responsibility, a sacrificial responsibility on the husband, much more so than the wife. So we're not going to talk about Ephesians 5 this morning. That's too personal. We'll talk about Ephesians 6, which is also personal, but not quite as much so. But Ephesians 6 begins, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Now we know that the letters that were written in the first century were what we call circular letters. They were circulated among the various congregations. They didn't have the mail system we have today. They didn't have television, radio. We all know that. They circulated them. They would say, for example, Paul would write a letter to a particular congregation, and they would circulate. They would share that with another congregation nearby, another congregation, to all the congregations that read it. most of the people at that time were illiterate. They couldn't read, couldn't write. And so they'd have somebody on Sunday, for example, to stand up and read a certain passage. And that's what is happening here. And in Ephesians, it talks about, early sections of it, talks about the beauty of the church. It talks about being saved by grace, not by works. It talks about where we're supposed to walk, how we're supposed to walk in our faith and our spiritual journey. Of course, Ephesians 5 talks to husband and wife. But then it comes to Ephesians 6, and he turns his direction of thought to the children, to the parents. And he says to the child, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Obedience, that word is a very interesting word. Those are two Greek words, hupo and akuo. Hupo meaning under. Akuo is to hear. We get our word acoustics from it. So you put those two together, you got to hear under, to listen under. It means to listen to somebody that's in authority, and to submit to that person that's in authority. You comply with their wishes. Let me show you another place that it's used. Back in Luke, the 2nd chapter, in verse 51, in the context, this is where Jesus has scared his parents, Mary and Joseph, because he stayed back in the temple while they proceeded on home with their friends. They come back searching for him, and they finally find him. And they say, "Why did you worry us like this?" Well, don't you know that I must be about my Father's business? Or some translations have, "Don't you know that I must be in my Father's house?" And then after that conversation, it says, verse 51, "And he," that is Jesus, the Son of God, the one who was omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, all-knowing, and he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection. There's that word, hupoakuo. He's in subjection to them, and his mother treasured all these things in her heart. Jesus obeyed his parents. The one who is omnipotent, all-powerful. The one who is omnipresent before he came down, or everywhere present. The one who is omniscient, all-knowing, who knew it all. We talk mockingly sometimes as he's a know-it-all. Jesus was a know-it-all, but in a good sense. Now, he chose while he was here on the earth to limit that knowledge. We know that because he said, "I don't know when I'm coming back. I just know I'm coming back. Only the Father knows that." But before he came here, he knew everything. And he knows that he knew everything when he's 12 years old. And as he is growing up through his teen years, he knows that he knew everything. He knows more than his parents do. He knows he understands life better than his parents do. But this individual who knows all of this lives in subjection to his parents, obeys his parents, puts himself under his parents. In Hebrews 5, verse 8 and 9, it says, "Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience." He learned, and that's the same word, to hear under, to comply, to submit. He learned to submit. He learned to comply by the things that he suffered, and became the author of eternal salvation to all those who obey him. So this is the idea of compliance, this idea of submission, this idea of recognizing that that person is in authority. And I'm to listen to that person, and I'm to comply with what they say. That's Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 1. It says, children, all children are to submit to their parents, to obey them in the Lord, in those things that are right, in those things that are in compliance with what the Lord would teach. But Paul doesn't leave it there, nor does God leave it there, because God is telling Paul what to say here. he says in verse 2, honor your father and mother. He turns it up a notch. Honor and obedience are really two different things. Obedience, you submit to somebody because they're a person in authority, and you know they have the power to cause you to suffer some consequences if you don't. I obeyed my father because I was afraid of the consequences. But I had a difficult time honoring my father because he was a man that I did not feel was worthy of honor. And we'll have more to say about that when that type of dynamic is in existence in a family. We'll say more about that as the week goes on. But I obeyed my mother. And I did whatever my mother told me to do. Not because I was afraid of the consequences, but because I respected my mother. I revered my mother. When you obey somebody, you listen to what they say, but a lot of times because you don't want to suffer any consequences. Whatever those consequences are, sometimes the consequences may be severe, sometimes they may not be severe. But when you honor somebody, you honor them whether there's any consequences or not. You honor them because of who they are. We obey God because we know the consequences if we don't. But as we grow and develop and as we mature as a Christian, our obedience turns more into we do what we do because we honor him, because we respect him. A child should grow from obedience, from the stage of obedience to a stage of honor. I still do what my mother wanted me to do when I was growing up. My mother's been dead now for 8 years. I don't do that because I'm afraid of any consequences. I do that because I respect her memory. I revere her memory. A child should obey their parents, but it should grow to the point where they do it not because they're afraid of consequences, but because they honor them, they respect them. Now, how can they do that? How can we demonstrate that honor? How can we demonstrate that respect, that reverence that we have for our parents? Begin by loving them. Begin by loving them. Don't just feel that, tell them. I don't know of a mom or dad, I don't know of any parent that doesn't like to hear their child say, Mom, I love you. Dad, I love you. Now, for some, it's easier to say than others. And some, it's easier to tell than others. It was hard for me to tell my dad that I loved him. It was so easy for me to tell my mother that I loved her. Young people and older people too alike, let's be willing and not afraid to say, I love you. There's nothing weak in that. There's nothing negative about that. That shows strength. We need to hear that. And then, as we love them, express your gratitude for them and to them. Let them know that you appreciate them. A lot of studies have been done on what is called burnout, where people get discouraged and they just want to quit. And they quit sometimes. Many times they quit. You know what the number one cause of burnout is? Research has determined this. The number one cause for burnout, discouragement, and people quitting, is a lack of appreciation. They don't feel appreciated. If you're still in the workforce and you're discouraged, I would dare say the reason is because you don't feel appreciated. You work, you give, but you don't feel it's appreciated. Our parents need to know that we appreciate them. Tell them that. Judy always, when I was still working, had a practice. She would fix my lunch, a brown bag it, eat in the office. I'd get more done that way. And so many mornings, she'd write a little note. And then she'd say such things, I love you, hope you have a good day. And many times she would say, I really appreciate what you're doing for our family. Boy, you talk about an upper. You talk about a drug that will help you get through the day. To know that you're being appreciated, and to hear that from your kids. Tell your parents that you appreciate the sacrifices they make. Tell them that you appreciate they're taking you to practice. Tell them that you appreciate all that you're doing for them. Let them know that. And they'll want to do more. And they'll want to do more. And let me say this. Tell them while you can. Tell them while you can, because the day's going to come where you can't, and you wish you could. I'm an avid reader of the newspaper. I like to start my morning off every morning with it. Sometimes it's a good start, sometimes it's not so positive a start, but I like to read it. One of my favorite sections, and you say, Everett, you're nuts. It's Ann Landers, Dear Abby. And I'll tell you why I like it. And I've read them for years. Because it says so much about humanity. It says so much about where people are and how they think. And ministering to people, it helped me a lot in seeing where people do live and how they're living and what they're thinking and what they're feeling and why they're feeling that. Several years ago, there was an article. Here was a letter that one of her readers wrote. And she said to Ann Landers, she said, I wrote this to my mother. And here's what the letter says. Dear Mom, I wish I could spend Mother's Day with you, but I can't. So I'm writing a letter and hope that you will read it in Ann Landers' column. Mom, I love you so much. There are so many things I didn't understand when I was young, but I understand them now. I didn't have any idea how hard you worked and the burdens you carried until I traveled that road myself. I didn't know how tough it was when you were having trouble with Dad and us kids, but I know now. I didn't realize how lonely you were until I was lonely. I didn't realize how hurt you were until I was hurt the same way by my own children. I didn't know how many times I could have made you happy by just saying, I love you, Mom. But now I know, because those are the words I long to hear from my own kids. Whoever said life is the greatest teacher of all knew what he was talking about. When I was growing up, we had more than our share of battles. I remember how I thought you were too hard on me, insisting that I keep my room neat as a pin, turn off the TV and do my homework, hang up my clothes, do chores around the house, and write thank you notes right away. You made me do a lot of things I didn't want to do. You said it was good for my character. I couldn't see the connection. I thought you were nuts. But now that I have kids of my own, I understand things a lot better. And I'm grateful that you didn't let me wear you down. Remembering your strength gives me strength to stand up to my own kids when they try to con me the way I tried to con you. It seems like I found time for everything and everyone but you. It would have been easy to drop in for a cup of tea and a hug, but my friends came first. Would any of them have done for me what you did? I doubt it. I remember the times you called on the phone and I was in a hurry to get off. It makes me ashamed. I remember, too, the times that I could have included you when my little family had outings, but I didn't. It took me all my life to learn what a mother is. I guess it's impossible to know this until you become a mother yourself. Believe me, now I know. She learned a lesson, but it was too late. Let's learn the lesson that parents like to hear thank yous. They like to know that they're appreciated. It's one of the ways of honoring them. And then thirdly, show them respect. Listen to them. You may not agree with them, but listen to them. Jesus did not always agree with his Father. If you don't believe me, look at the garden. Father, it's your will, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. Finally, he did agree with him. He went ahead and went through what he didn't want to because of his respect for his Father and his love for fellow man. We may not always agree with our parents, but out of respect, let's listen to them. Let's give them what they deserve. And then obey them. Not for fear of consequences, but because you respect them, because you honor them, because you revere them. Again, you may not want to do what they're asking you to do, but you're the child, they're the parent. They've been down that road many times, and they're trying to steer you away from things that they got them into trouble. Listen to them, obey them. That helps them feel very honored. And be helpful. If you see something needs to be done, do it, if you have that ability. Now, your parents may faint. They may pass out because they're not used to that. But it will say to the parent, they're beginning to understand. They're beginning to get it. They're beginning to act like an adult. They're beginning to get ready to go out into the world where somebody's not going to be always telling them what to do or how to do it. They're beginning to take some pride in who they are. They're beginning to take some pride in our family. They begin to realize that we are a unit, and that every part of that unit is necessary to make it an effective, successful, strong unit. They're finally getting it. I remember when I was a boy, I always wanted a set of bunk beds. I thought they were the greatest thing. But Mom and Dad couldn't afford them. But finally, in the 8th grade, my younger brother and I got a set of bunk beds. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I mean, that was the greatest thing. My dream was fulfilled. I had arrived. My brother and I shared a room for quite a while because we had the bunk beds. We moved to a big house where we could have separate rooms, so we separated the bunk beds. And I remember one day I said to my younger brother, I said, let's put the bunk beds together in this one room. It was my brother's room, the other brother's room, who had moved out. He said, okay. That was one of the sorriest days of my life. See, my younger brother was a pig. You couldn't get in his room, first of all. I'm going to say you go in his room. You couldn't even get in his room. His bed would never get made. His clothes would be all over the place. And Mom and Dad didn't say anything. They said, that's your section. You take care of it. And if they didn't take care of it, you had to live in it. Well, I'm the type, I've always been organized. I like organization. There's a place for everything and everything in its place. I knew exactly what everything was. I remember one time, Mom and Dad came into my room and they straightened up my dresser. I was so mad. I couldn't find anything. I knew exactly where my comb was supposed to be. I knew exactly where my money was supposed to be. I knew exactly where my book was supposed to be. I knew exactly where everything was, and they had discombobulated it. They had organized it. Well, that's the way I was, but my brother was the other way. And I'd forgotten that, or I ignored it, because I wanted those bunk beds back together again. So we moved the beds together in the same room. And after about 2 months, I couldn't take it any longer. He made our room just as pathetic. Clothes everywhere all the time. His bed was never made. He'd bring his friends in. They'd eat in the beds and had crumbs all over the place. And I just couldn't stand it. I said, we're going to move in separate rooms again. My brother got married. And you know my brother's house now? Everything is in its place. I mean, everything is spotless. It is clean. It is organized. It is neat. What made the difference? One, he didn't take any pride in his family's house when he was growing up. But now it's his, and he takes pride in it. teach your children respect and teach them to be helpers, to say, we're a family unit. Let's work together to make this family unit strong. You do your part, I'll do my part. And folks, we've got to set the example here. My dad was the type that you'd be sitting on a couch and he'd say, go get me something. He wouldn't go get it himself. We had to run and get it for him all the time. I vowed when I had kids, I would not do that, and I wouldn't. I would never do that. But my dad treated us almost like servants. That was not a good role model. A good role model says, I will serve you, you serve me, we'll serve each other together. We'll help each other. That's honor. So parents, if you want honor from your children, and you want respect from your children, honor them and respect them. If you want to be treated as a human being, treat them as a human being. If you want your feelings valued, you value their feelings. Because if you don't, you're going to break that line of communication. You're going to break that relationship. There needs to be mutual respect. But let me say this. Even when there isn't, the children still, as a Christian, is to obey their parents and to honor their parents. And maybe someday their parents will do the same for them. Maybe not, but at least they will have the knowledge that I tried my best to be the child that God wanted me to be. Another way that we can show respect for our parents, and we hit on this a little bit in class earlier this morning, we honor our parents by the mate that we choose. I wanted a wife like my mother because I honored and I respected my mother. And so when I started looking for a wife, I looked for girls who were like my mother. And you know what I found? I found a girl just like my mother. In most respects. My mother hated cleaning house. Her house was not very neat. But Judy is a good housekeeper. But Judy and my mother were almost clones of each other when it came to loving kids and taking care of kids, taking care of the house and cooking and looking out for their best interests of their husbands and try to be a Christian role model. And I always said, my mother and Judy got very, very close. And I always told people that if Judy and I ever separated, then my mother would choose Judy. That's how close they became. But our marriage has been, we've had problems, but we've had 55 good years. Because I chose a woman like a woman that I respected, like my mother. I chose a woman that would help me get to heaven as my mother tried to help me get to heaven. I chose a woman who loved God more than anything, like my mother chose to love God more than anything. And my love for my wife and my respect for my wife as a woman is a reflection of my feelings toward my mother and toward women in general. My mother was a good role model for women. She was a good example of a woman. And because I respected her, I respect women in general. And my mother knew that. My mother felt honored by my reaction and my treatment of my wife and women in general. But our honoring our parents does not stop when we leave their house. The true honor really comes out after we leave them. That we show them that we respect them by continuing to love them, by choosing to spend time with them, by encouraging them, by being patient with them, by helping them, and by allowing them to help us. one of the constant complaints I have heard from elderly people is I feel so useless. I don't have any purpose. I have a lot of regrets in my life. And one of the biggest ones is relationship to my mother. As you can tell, I love my mother dearly, respected her highly. But I remember when we lived in St. Clairsville, we brought my mother up to live in our area when she was 88 years old. She lived to be 100. And she lived in an apartment for 8 of those years, had her own place. Our daughter and her family lived in our area. They all attended church where I preached there in St. Clairsville. And we'd have them over for lunch on Sundays. That meant about 9 or 10 people every Sunday. That meant a lot of cooking, a lot of dishwashing. I do not like dishwashers. I'm talking about the machines. We have a dishwasher, and I told Judy, I said, if anything ever happens to you, that dishwasher will never be used. I said, Everett, do you do the dishes? Yeah, I do. Don't mind doing dishes. When I was a kid, I hated doing dishes. Hated it. But I don't mind it now. Judy and I, we do the dishes together. She washes, I dry. And that's how we did it when my daughter and her family would come over to eat with us, when my mother would come the same Sunday to eat with us. Mom did not like feeling useless. She always wanted to be busy doing something, helping, feel like she's contributing. And she would want to help with the dishes. Well, that was my job. That was my role. And my mother got careless in drying dishes. She didn't get them dry. She didn't know where to put everything. And so I would say, Mom, I'll do it. I'll dry the dishes. And I'd have to kind of push her out of the way. And she'd go over and stand on the other side of the little bar that we had there in the kitchen. And over again, she would say, and she'd say this all the time, and I didn't get the message. She would say, I'm helping. I'm staying out of the way. And I thought it was a joke. For the last 3 or 4 years, I've reflected on what she said, and I thought, Everett, what she was telling you was, I feel useless. I want to help. I want to do something. I didn't get that message. I could have dried the dishes later on after she left, after we took her home. I could have put stuff away, but see, that took too much time. I look back when I was a little boy. I remember Mom and Dad working with me on something that they could have done like that. But they took time with me because they needed to help me to feel useful and to train me. I didn't realize that when my mother was in her late 90s, it was my time to do that for her, so that she could feel useful, that she could feel like she had a purpose. You and I can do things more quickly when we're younger, maybe even at the age we are now. And it's not good for our children to not let them help. It's not good for our parents to not let them help. Our children need to learn how to do it. Our parents need to feel, I still have a purpose. I'm still useful. That's part of honoring them. That's part of respecting them. Showing them, I love you and I want you to feel like you have a role still to perform in life. And even after they're gone, you and I need to honor them. By the way, we talk about them. Not by just visiting their grave 2 or 3 times a year and putting flowers on them. But the best way, let me tell you this, and I don't want you to forget this. The best way that you and I can honor our parents after they're gone is not with a monument on the grave. That's nice. Not with flowers on Memorial Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Labor Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, whenever you want to do it. That's not the best way. That's a good way. We do that. That's not the best way. The best way to honor your parents is to live a better life because they were in your life. You are their legacy. You are their work of their hands. You are the result of their life. And if we honor them, we want to say, my mother, my father were great people. I am the person I am today because of them. What does our life say about our parents? You say, Everett, and I said this before about my father, my mom or dad's hard to honor. They don't deserve it. Not the way they've treated me, not the way they've acted. When I was preaching in Circleville, I have a practice through the whole time I was preaching that I'd go where the people's minds were. Say, for example, Mother's Day or Father's Day, I'd preach Mother's Day services or Father's Day sermon. And people knew that. They knew that was coming. This one woman, she was in her early 40s, would be absent every Mother's Day. After the second or third year I was there, she said, Everett, she said, you probably noticed that I don't come to church on Mother's Day. And I said, yeah, I've noticed that. Because she was pretty regular in attendance other days. And she said, well, the reason is because I know what you're going to talk about. I know you're going to talk about mothers. And that's hard for me because my mother's not a good mother. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. 2 years later, her mother passed away. Judy and I went to the funeral home. And the woman was there, and there weren't very many people there, so we had time to talk. And I remember standing by her mother's casket. I remember this woman talking to us for 20, 25 minutes solid, without our hardly saying anything. And the whole 20 to 25 minutes, she talked about how good of a mother she had, how kind she was, how she helped her be a better person. And I'm sitting there thinking, why couldn't you see that while your mother was alive? And what I've concluded is that, yeah, her mother had faults. But that girl allowed those few faults to blind her to all the other good points that mother had. So you may say, well, my mom or dad's not worthy of honor. And we're going to develop this throughout the week as we go on. You may feel they're not. But I would dare say that if you look hard enough, if you think back hard enough, you will realize that your mom and dad had more good points than they did bad. Maybe the bad was very glaring, very, very intense, and affected you more than any others. But I would dare say that if you list their good points and you list the bad points, the good would outweigh the bad. See that now, while they're still alive. When I was growing up under my father's roof, he died 51 years ago. I couldn't see any good in him. As I look back now, I see there was so much more good than there was bad. So many more positives than there were negatives. But the bad blinded me to his good. Let's don't make that mistake. Let's realize our parents, our mothers and dads are worthy of honor. Let's give them that. Let's love them and let's tell them that. Let's be appreciative of them and let's tell them that. Let's honor them by living the way they try to train us to be, especially if we had Christian parents. And even if we didn't, I'm sure they still try to teach you some good things. And again, let me conclude with this. If you really want to honor your parents, live a better life in their memory. And this morning, if you see your life is not what it should be, it's not even what your parents taught it to be, or maybe they taught you things from the scriptures and you see, I've let those slide. And I'm not the person I need to be. I'm not a person that my children need. I'm not the person that my parents need. I'm not the spouse that my husband or wife needs. And I want to make some changes. I want to acknowledge that I've got areas that I need to work on. And I want the prayers of the church to help me with that. Or maybe there's things that you've done that are more glaring than the public knows about, and you've hurt the church as a result of it. Acknowledge that this morning. Or maybe you've never committed your life to Christ. The happiest days of my life, 3 of the happiest days of my life, were the days that I got to baptize my 3 children. You can make this church family happy today if you've not been baptized into Christ, by come to the front, confessing Christ as being the Son of God, repenting of your sins, be buried with Christ in baptism for the forgiveness of those sins. And not only will you make this church family happy, you'll make the angels happy, and you'll make God happy. And that's the most important thing. So if you need to come for any reason at all, will you come as together? We stand and sing this song that was announced before the lesson.
Hear the sweet voice of